The doors of Empire Grand Hotel glided open, revealing a world of shimmering chandeliers, velvet carpets, and whispered conversations between the city's elite. For most guests, stepping into this five-star paradise meant luxury and comfort. But, for Elijah Brooks, it felt like stepping into a storm he didn't see coming. His heart raced, not out of nervousness, but anticipation. This wasn't just a hotel stay for him, it was a homecoming. But instead of the warm welcome he expected, he was about to be reminded that money doesn't erase prejudice, and soon, the hotel staff would learn a lesson they'd never forget. Elijah approached the front desk, his suitcase rolling softly behind him. He had traveled thousands of miles back from studying abroad, eager to relax before meeting his mother, who, as far as the world knew, was just a high-profile businesswoman. But as he reached the counter, something felt off. The receptionist, a tall woman in a crisp uniform, barely looked up. Instead, her eyes flickered past him, locking onto a well-dressed businessman standing behind him. Her smile widened instantly as she greeted the other guest first, despite Elijah standing right in front of her. Elijah waited and waited. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his tone polite. "I have a reservation under the name Elijah Brooks." The receptionist barely hid her frown. Her gaze swept over him, his casual designer hoodie, sneakers, and skin tone, before she forced a tight-lipped smile. "Are you sure you're in the right place, sir?" Elijah stiffened, his fingers tightened around his suitcase handle. This wasn't new, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The receptionist typed his name slowly, as if expecting the system to prove him wrong. A few painful seconds passed. Then, a sharp beep on the computer screen. Her expression shifted. Elijah knew that sound well. It meant his reservation was there. But instead of checking him in, she hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she glanced at the security guard, standing nearby. "Sir," she said, her voice suddenly colder, "we have strict guest policies here. Are you sure your name is on the reservation?" Elijah felt his chest tighten. "I booked the presidential suite," he said firmly. The security guard's brows lifted, slightly, like he didn't believe it. The receptionist crossed her arms. "I may need to see extra identification before proceeding." Elijah inhaled sharply. He had stayed in luxury hotels all over the world, and not once had he ever been asked for extra identification. He could feel the stares of guests in the lobby. A few whispered. Some laughed softly. He knew what they were thinking. What is he doing here? He must be lost. There's no way he belongs in the presidential suite. Elijah's jaw clenched, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. With measured control, he pulled out his passport and slid it across the counter. "There," he said. "That should be enough proof, right?" The receptionist hesitated. Then, she sighed dramatically, like he was making her life difficult. "Wait here," she muttered, walking away. Elijah exhaled slowly. This wasn't just rudeness. This was something deeper, something he had felt all his life. But they had no idea who they were messing with. Because this wasn't just a hotel stay. It was his family's empire. While Elijah stood there waiting, the businessman behind him chuckled. "Rough day, kid?" He smirked. Elijah said nothing. He was used to people underestimating him. But what happened next? That was the final straw. The receptionist returned, but instead of handing back his passport, she waved over two security guards. "Sir," she said, her tone dripping with fake politeness, "we have a strict policy against unauthorized visitors. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elijah blinked. For a moment, the words didn't register. Then, anger ignited in his chest. "You're kicking me out?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. The guard stepped closer. "You need to leave," one of them said, reaching for his arm. And that's when it happened. The lobby doors swung open, and she walked in. The moment her heels clicked against the marble floor, the entire energy shifted. Hotel managers snapped to attention. Employees who had ignored Elijah just seconds ago stood up straighter. The receptionist went pale. Because standing there, dressed in a sleek designer suit, radiating power and authority, was Veronica Brooks, CEO, hotel mogul, and most importantly, Elijah's mother. She stopped, took one glance at the chaos unfolding, and her expression hardened. The receptionist stumbled over her words. Ms. Brooks, there seems to be a... Veronica held up a hand. Stop. A single word, but it echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Then, she turned to Elijah. Son, she said, her voice dangerously calm. What's going on here? Elijah let out a slow breath. I was just trying to check into my suite, he said. But apparently that's against hotel policy now. A heavy silence fell over the room. The receptionist looked like she wanted to vanish into thin air. One of the guards stepped back, suddenly realizing his massive mistake. And Veronica? Her lips curved into a slow, chilling smile. Interesting, she said. Because last I checked, she turned to the stunned employees. I own this hotel. A thick, uncomfortable silence settled over the grand lobby of Empire Grand Hotel. The employees, once so confident, now stood frozen, staring at the woman whose presence had just shattered their reality. Because standing before them, radiating power and authority, was Veronica Brooks, the hotel's owner, and she was not happy. The receptionist, the security guards, even the guests who had been watching Elijah struggle, suddenly looked nervous. Elijah saw it, the way the color drained from the receptionist's face, the way the security guards shifted uncomfortably, as if realizing they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Veronica took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her gaze landed on the receptionist first. Let me get this straight, she said, her voice deceptively calm. You just denied my son access to the hotel he technically owns. Because what? He didn't look rich enough for you? The receptionist opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no good excuse. But she tried anyway. Ms. Brooks. She stammered, I didn't realize he was your son. Veronica's eyebrow lifted. And if he wasn't my son? She asked. Would you have treated him any differently? The receptionist stayed silent, because they both knew the answer. One of the hotel managers, a tall man in an expensive suit, rushed forward, desperate to fix the situation. Ms. Brooks, he said quickly, forcing a smile. I assure you this was just a misunderstanding. We have certain protocols. Veronica cut him off. Protocol? She repeated, her voice sharp. Is that what you call discriminating against guests? The manager swallowed hard. No, of course not. I just mean... Veronica held up a hand. Tell me, she said, her tone almost mocking. Which protocol says that a black man in casual clothes must show extra identification to check into his own reservation? The entire lobby was dead silent. Elijah could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. The receptionist's hands were shaking now. The security guards? They were looking anywhere but at Veronica. And the other guests, who had been watching, judging, whispering, were now realizing that they had witnessed something much bigger than a simple hotel check-in. This wasn't just about bad customer service. This was about bias, power, and the ugly reality of discrimination. And Veronica wasn't done yet. She turned to the head of security, her expression icy. Why did you approach my son? She asked. The guard cleared his throat, suddenly looking very small despite his large build. We were just following standard procedure. Liar! The words snapped through the air like a whip. Everyone flinched. Veronica's eyes flashed with anger. Your procedure was to assume my son didn't belong here. You saw a young black man in an expensive hotel, and instead of doing your job professionally, you judged him. The guard had nothing to say. Veronica exhaled sharply, shaking her head. This isn't just a mistake, she said. This is a pattern. And today, it ends. The hotel employees were officially panicking. The receptionist tried again. Ma'am, if we had known he was related to you, we would have... Veronica's eyes snapped to her. Would have what? She challenged. Treated him with basic respect? The receptionist shut up. Veronica's tone dropped, low and lethal. This hotel is meant to be a place of luxury and excellence, not a place where guests are judged based on race, appearance, or assumptions. Then, she did something no one expected. She turned to Elijah. "This is your call," she said. "What do you think should happen?" Elijah blinked. Everyone in the room was now staring at him. The power had just shifted completely. The same people who had ignored him minutes ago were now waiting for his judgment. And for the first time, he saw real fear in their eyes. Elijah took a slow breath. He could feel the weight of it. He could demand firings right here, right now. He could make them feel as small as they had made him feel. But instead, he looked at the employees, the receptionist, the guards, the manager, and saw something else. They weren't just afraid of losing their jobs. They were afraid of the truth finally catching up to them. So he spoke clearly, calmly, and with authority. "You don't deserve to be in the hospitality industry if you can't treat guests with basic respect," he said. Then he turned to his mother. "Make sure they learn that lesson." Veronica's smile was sharp. "Oh," she said, eyes gleaming. "I will." She turned to the hotel manager. "Effective immediately. Every single employee involved in this situation is suspended pending an investigation." The receptionist gasped. The guards looked like they wanted to disappear, but Veronica wasn't done. "This hotel will be undergoing a complete policy review, and if I find out that any guest has ever been treated this way before," she smiled, "then I'll be making even bigger changes." The employees looked horrified, because they knew this wasn't just about today. This was about every time they had done this before and gotten away with it. But now, the game had changed. The security guards backed away. The manager was already pulling out his phone, probably to call his boss in full panic mode. And the receptionist? She stood there, paralyzed, knowing she had ruined her career in less than 10 minutes. Veronica turned back to Elijah. "Shall we?" she asked, gesturing toward the elevator. Elijah picked up his suitcase. The same staff that had doubted him seconds ago were now watching him in complete silence. He didn't say another word. He just walked past them, straight toward the presidential suite that had been his all along. The atmosphere inside the Empire Grand Hotel had changed completely. An hour ago, the employees laughed behind Elijah's back, whispering about how he didn't belong. Now, they walked on eggshells, stealing nervous glances at Veronica Brooks, the woman who owned everything around them. And the worst part? This wasn't over, because Veronica was just getting started. After Elijah and his mother entered the presidential suite, the hotel staff scrambled to recover from the disaster they had just created. The hotel manager, now sweating through his expensive suit, rushed to his office. He slammed the door shut and immediately dialed the regional director. "We have a situation." But before he could explain, his office phone lit up with another incoming call, then another, and another. He swallowed hard, because Veronica Brooks had already made her move. By the next morning, corporate auditors and legal teams arrived at the hotel, reviewing everything. It wasn't just about Elijah's mistreatment. Veronica wanted to know how deep this problem ran. And the results? Worse than anyone imagined, because Elijah wasn't the first guest who had been treated this way. Not even close. The investigators uncovered years of hidden complaints, and suddenly, every employee who had laughed behind Elijah's back yesterday, they weren't laughing anymore. Because this wasn't just one mistake, this was systemic, and now, Veronica was about to burn it all down. At precisely noon, every single hotel employee was called into the grand conference hall. The air was thick, with anxiety. Some employees already knew what was coming. Others still didn't grasp just how deep in trouble they were. Then, Veronica Brooks walked in, and the room fell dead silent. She took her place at the front of the room, her expression unreadable. She slowly placed a stack of reports on the table. Then she spoke. "Let me tell you a story," she said, her voice calm, yet sharp as a blade. "A young man walks into a hotel, excited to stay in a place his family built." Her eyes swept the room. But instead of a warm welcome, he's met with suspicion, judgment, and humiliation. Her voice hardened. Not because he was rude, not because he didn't pay, but because of the color of his skin. A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Others lowered their heads, knowing exactly where this was going. Veronica picked up one of the reports. And the worst part, she continued, this has happened before. Many times. She threw the report onto the table. She lifted her chin. I built this hotel with the belief that every guest deserves to be treated like royalty, she said. And if any of you think you're above that mission, she leaned forward, then you don't deserve to work here. Then, she did something no one expected. She picked up a stack of termination letters. One by one, she began calling out names. The head of security, fired. The receptionist who had humiliated Elijah, fired. The manager who tried to cover it up, fired. Each employee stood up in stunned silence, realizing they had just lost everything. One of them tried to argue. Ms. Brooks, please, I've worked here for 10 years. I didn't mean, but Veronica cut them off. You had 10 years to treat people with respect, she said coldly. And you failed. By the end of the meeting, over a dozen employees had been fired, and the ones who remained, they sat there, terrified, knowing they had just witnessed a revolution. Veronica exhaled slowly and turned toward the remaining staff. As of today, this hotel will be undergoing a complete transformation. Discrimination, bias, and cruelty have no place here, she said firmly. And if you can't uphold that, she smiled coldly, you're free to leave now. Not a single person moved, because they knew. This was a new era, and there was no room for hate anymore. From the second-floor balcony, Elijah watched everything, saw justice served. He saw change happening in real time, and for the first time in years, he felt proud. His mother had always been a powerful woman, but today, she had proven that power isn't just about wealth, it's about using it to do what's right. And as he looked down at the staff who had doubted him, the people who had mocked him just a day ago, he knew one thing for certain. They would never forget his name again. For most businesses, a staff shakeup meant a few disgruntled employees, maybe some gossip behind closed doors. But for Empire Grand Hotel, the fallout was much worse, because when powerful people get exposed, they don't just walk away quietly, and one fired employee was about to make sure Veronica Brooks paid the price. The day after the mass firings, the hotel was eerily quiet. Employees, who remained, moved cautiously, afraid to make the wrong move and end up like the others. But while things seemed calm on the surface, something wasn't right. Elijah could feel it, the way some employees refused to meet his eyes, the hushed whispers that disappeared the moment he walked by. And then, the first threat arrived. It was delivered with room service, hidden beneath the silver platter. Elijah almost missed it, just a neatly folded slip of paper. But when he opened it, his stomach dropped. You should have stayed quiet. People like you don't belong here. Watch your back. Elijah's hands tightened around the note. His heart pounded, but he refused to let fear take over. Instead, he marched straight to his mother's suite, because whoever sent this, they had just declared war. The moment Elijah showed her the note, Veronica's expression hardened. She wasn't surprised. She had dealt with threats before. But this was personal. She picked up the phone and immediately called security. I want a full sweep of the hotel, she ordered. Check the cameras, the employee logs, and who delivered this tray. I want answers. Now. Elijah watched her in awe. His mother wasn't just rich. She was a force of nature. And whoever thought they could intimidate her, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Within hours, security had footage from the service hallway, and there, on the screen, was one of the fired employees. Matthew Gray, former assistant manager, the same man who had stood silently during Elijah's humiliation in the lobby, the same man who had tried to downplay the discrimination when Veronica confronted the staff. And now? He had slipped back into the hotel. Despite being banned from the premises, security tracked him down to the staff parking lot. But when they got there, his car was already gone, and that's when things got worse. Because Veronica's phone buzzed, and when she looked at the caller ID, her face went pale. It was hotel security, but not with news about Matthew. Instead, they had a bigger problem. Someone had broken into Elijah's suite. The room was trashed, drawers yanked open, personal belongings scattered everywhere. Whoever it was, They were looking for something. Elijah and Veronica rushed upstairs. And when they stepped inside, they saw the message left for them, scrawled across the mirror in red marker. This isn't over. That was the final straw. Veronica snapped into action. She ordered a full security lockdown on the hotel. Keycard access was restricted. Security doubled at all exits. Police were called, but Elijah wasn't convinced that was enough. We need to find Matthew, not just block the doors, he said. Veronica nodded. I have an idea, she said, and that's when she pulled out her phone and made a call that changed everything. Veronica had connections, powerful ones, and in less than an hour, she had arranged a fake meeting, luring Matthew Gray into a trap. She leaked a rumor through the hotel grapevine that she was willing to negotiate severance packages for the fired employees, and as expected, Matthew took the bait. He arrived at a private lounge, expecting to walk away with money. Instead, he walked straight into Veronica, Elijah, and 2 off-duty police officers. The moment he saw them, he knew he was caught. But instead of running, he smirked. You can't prove anything, he said. Veronica tilted her head. Oh, really? She said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside? Surveillance footage of him slipping into the hotel. Employee records showing his keycard was used after his termination. A witness statement from a staff member who saw him near Elijah's suite. Matthew's smirk disappeared. You ruined my career, he spat. For what? Some spoiled rich kid? Elijah leaned forward. No, he said calmly. Because people like you think you can get away with anything. And today, he smiled. You learned you can't. The off-duty cops stood up. Matthew Gray, one of them said. You're under arrest for trespassing, harassment, and vandalism. Matthew froze. You can't. You did this to yourself, Veronica said coldly. And with that, the police slapped the cuffs on him. As they dragged him away, Elijah felt a weight lift off his chest. For the first time since arriving, he felt safe. But more than that, he felt victorious, because justice had finally been served. With Matthew Gray arrested, the threats neutralized, and Empire Grand Hotel finally free of its toxic past, Elijah Brooks could finally breathe. For the first time since stepping into that lobby, he felt like he belonged. But just when he thought things were settling down, his mother, Veronica Brooks, surprised him with a life-changing offer. And Elijah? He was about to make a decision that would shock everyone. The next morning, a new energy filled Empire Grand. Employees were more alert, more careful, knowing that the days of discrimination and unchecked bias were over. Guests who had once been ignored or mistreated were now being welcomed properly. The hotel had announced a full policy overhaul with diversity training, an anonymous complaint system, and strict anti-discrimination rules. And the best part? A few ex-employees who had been pushed out by the toxic management were invited back, this time into positions of leadership. The message was clear. Empire Grand was no longer a place for bias. It was a place for everyone, and standing at the center of it all, Elijah, watching his mother rebuild the very empire she had created. But what he didn't realize, she was about to pass him the torch. Later that evening, Elijah sat with Veronica in the rooftop lounge, overlooking the city skyline. The last few days had been a whirlwind, but now, with things finally calm, he was just grateful. His mother sipped her drink before finally speaking. You know, she said casually, I think it's time for me to step back from all this. Elijah froze mid-sip. Wait, what? Veronica smiled knowingly. I built this hotel from the ground up, she said. But I don't plan on running it forever. Elijah's chest tightened. He had never expected this conversation. Sure, he had studied business while abroad. But did she actually mean, You're offering me the hotel? He asked, his voice quiet, almost disbelieving. Veronica set down her glass and met his eyes. Why not? She said. You saw firsthand what happens when leadership goes unchecked. You've always had a sharp mind, Elijah. And now, you've proven you have a strong heart too. Elijah swallowed hard. This wasn't just a job offer. This was his mother handing him the empire she built. It was a legacy, a responsibility. And in that moment, he knew he had a choice to make. For hours, Elijah sat in his suite, thinking, could he really do this? Could he take the weight of an entire empire on his shoulders? But as he stared out the window, his mind replayed everything that had happened. And then, he thought about all the other guests. People like him, who had been judged before they even spoke. People who deserved a place where they felt welcome. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. Because in that moment, he knew. This was bigger than him. This was a mission, and he wanted to be the one to lead it. The next morning, the entire executive team of Empire Grand was called to a special meeting. The employees whispered among themselves, wondering what was going on. Then, Veronica and Elijah walked in side by side. Veronica took the microphone first. As you all know, she began, Empire Grand is entering a new era. She paused, letting her words sink in. And I've decided that it's time for me to step away from daily operations. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. But don't worry, she continued with a smile. Because I'm leaving the hotel in very capable hands. She turned to Elijah. And just like that, the truth hit everyone at once. Elijah was taking over. Some employees looked stunned, others looked relieved, and a few actually smiled. Because they knew this was the best thing that could have happened. Elijah stepped forward, clearing his throat. I know not everyone believes in change, he said. I know some of you feared what would happen when my mother cleaned house. But let me be very clear. His expression hardened slightly. Discrimination, favoritism, and cruelty, they have no place here. A few employees nodded in agreement. Empire Grand will no longer be a place where people question whether they belong. It will be a place where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve. His voice grew stronger. If you're willing to be part of that future, I welcome you with open arms. He paused, looking around the room. But if you're not, he smiled. There's the door. Silence. Then, one by one, employees applauded. Some even cheered. And just like that, a new legacy had begun. That evening, as Elijah walked through the grand lobby, he noticed something different. People who once ignored him now greeted him with respect. Guests who once felt out of place now looked at ease. And just as he was about to step into the elevator, a young black couple walked in. The receptionist, a new hire, greeted them with a warm smile. Welcome to Empire Grand, she said. How can I assist you today? Elijah watched the interaction unfold. No hesitation, no judgment, just pure hospitality. And for the first time since stepping into this hotel, he felt at home. Because now, this place wasn't just his mother's empire, it was his, and he was going to make sure no one ever felt unwelcome again. What do you think about this story? Have you ever seen someone get put in their place like this? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. Your support means the world.